So, like I said, this is an event that we host twice a year in this area. It's run by volunteers who really just want more servant leaders where we work and where we play and where we live and where we learn. That's what we're looking to. The Wisconsin Servant Leadership Group is all about, and I see a lot of individuals that are very involved in that group amongst us today. So I hope that you enjoy your event. I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing, we'll have 3 speakers. I'm going to switch back to this other mic now. You don't need me on too. I'll switch back over here. So we have 3 speakers. After the 3 speakers present their servant leader stories on authenticity, then we'll have a panel session and go into a round table. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. So our first speaker is Rachel Hunter. I'm super excited to be able to introduce Rachel today. Rachel is a 2020 grad of MSOE in the mechanical engineering department. She works for Husco, and she was also in our first cohort of Create Fellows. So that's a leadership development program that is led by Natalie Villegas, who is here with us today. And Rachel was was one of the people in the first cohort. So she is going to share her story. One of the things you'll learn about her is her passion for creating a more equitable opportunities within STEM fields. So she's going to share her story. Welcome.
Here we go. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
My name's Rachel. I'm excited to share with you my story over the last 9 years or so, which is how I've grown into the ever becoming more authentic version of myself. So this is me when I was 18. I had just graduated from East Troy High School, which is a small town about 30 minutes from here. And I was excited to go learn how to be an engineer. I had built up some skills doing FIRST Robotics, which is a competitive robotics program for K-12 students, and I was excited to see what I could do at MSOE. I was also excited to reinvent myself. As most 18-year-olds are, I couldn't wait to get out of my parents' house and see what opportunities awaited me in Milwaukee. I was confident that calculus couldn't get that much harder. When I first got to MSOE, I was so excited about my new life. I was studying mechanical engineering, I was making new friends, and on my first week on campus, I joined the rowing team. And I didn't know what rowing was until that previous summer when I was watching it in the Olympics. But when I showed up to campus, my friends and I found out that there actually was not a women's rowing program here. So we started one. At the same time, I started working for our STEM department, which those of you who are familiar with MSOE, it's one of the greatest programs that I think MSOE has to offer the community. And I was working in Milwaukee Public School System. I was working on with middle school students on the north and south side, teaching them the competitive robotics that I was able to do when I was in high school and middle school. I always describe the first 6 months at MSOE as the most transformative of my life. And part of that was forming new friendships, finding out that calculus was a lot harder, and also learning about my privilege for the very first time. Working in schools on the north and south side introduced me to students whose life experience was a lot different than mine. And it gave me the opportunity to understand how lucky I was to be able to have the experience to do competitive robotics, to take AP classes, and to have a support system that allowed me to go to college in the first place. I didn't understand why these opportunities weren't available to everyone, so I started to educate myself. And that's what really sparked my passion for equity in STEM education that kind of carries me through to where I am today. As I progressed through college, I was settling into my routine as a student athlete. I did several internships at Husco where I now work. And it was really great to be able to connect what I was learning in school with what I was learning at work. I increased my community involvement. I got as involved as I could in the Milwaukee community, doing a lot of volunteering inside of MSOE and outside of MSOE. I was one of the inaugural Create Student Fellows, and I also created STEM to Stern, partnering with the Milwaukee Brain Club when I was a student at MSOE, where we brought students from the schools that I was working in to campus to learn how to do competitive robotics, and also to the boathouse to learn how to row. It was later in college that I was first faced with imposter syndrome, and that's something that has continued to be present in my everyday life. Both on and off the water, I felt like I was faking it, and I felt like I was the only one who was struggling to understand who I was and was questioning the decisions that I was making. School was a really big undertaking. I had a lot going on, and time management was a learned skill. School was more of a struggle than I had anticipated, and it was really challenging for me to understand why I was struggling when it felt like none of my peers were. The more involved I got with the community and the more students I was able to interact with, I really learned the power of listening to understand instead of listening for my turn to speak. And I was able to form strong connection with students and understand the lived experience that they had that was different than my own. And because of that, I was able to understand that these students just wanted someone to listen to, and I wanted to be an advocate for them. When I graduated from college, I adopted a cat, and I focused on my relationships. At the same time, we decided to turn STEM to Stern into a national nonprofit, quickly expanding to 5 clubs outside of Milwaukee within that first year. This was a season of a lot of change for all of us. I graduated amidst a global pandemic, and I was really questioning a lot that was going on with the world, and the social justice movements that were happening in this country made me question my career path, whether or not engineering was where I could make the most impact, or whether I should refocus my efforts somewhere else. I was able to slow down my life and really understand where I wanted to go. And then I moved to St. Louis, and I took a job with Eaton Corporation in their leadership development program. I was making new friends while trying to maintain my old friendships, and STEM to Stern was growing at a rapid rate. By the end of the first year, we had over 15 clubs. By the end of the second, we had over 20. I was managing the STEM curriculum for all these programs and working with the leaders at each of those clubs on a regular basis.
Okay.
This was where I started to lean on some of the servant leadership principles that I learned at MSOE. When you're working with leaders in different communities, you quickly understand that the resources available in every community is different. We couldn't use the exact same model that we used in Milwaukee, in Detroit, or in Trenton, New Jersey. So I had to get down with each of the leaders in each of the programs that we were working with and understand their communities, their students, and their needs. It was important to me that I wanted to be the foundation for each of these new organizations and understand what was happening with all of the students in these new communities. I wanted to be a support system as well as a supervisor. On the professional side at work, I was really struggling to understand a new manufacturing environment. In most rooms, I was the only woman and I was the youngest. The imposter syndrome came back in a big way. I thought things would get easier after college, and I could not understand why they didn't. I was missing my life in Milwaukee, I was struggling to navigate in a new city, and I was trying to understand a lifestyle post-college. After a few years, it was time for a change. I moved back to Wisconsin, returned to my job at Cusco, because I was looking for a smaller company that had a culture that I felt I could succeed in and valued my skills. I got re-involved in the robotics community, continued to expand my volunteer spending most of my winter weekends refereeing for high school robotics competitions, and I got back into coaching rowing. Connecting with the middle school students helped invigorate me for the work that I was doing on a national scale and really understand the impact that I was able to have on these students. Navigating this was another big change for me, but I was finally starting to settle into what felt like some new confidence. My sister was moving, and I was struggling to understand that, but at the same time, I was reconnecting with friends here in Milwaukee. I was also able to become more of a leader in the STEM to Stern space, expanding to 23 clubs, and starting to take on additional leadership responsibilities on top of my day job as an engineer. In 2023, I became the executive director of STEM to Stern. I also started to expand my hobbies. I got into competitive running, and I was trying to lean into the things in my life that I felt made me the most me, like traveling, going to visit my sister in Colorado, spending time with my friends, going to concerts. Becoming the leader of a national organization was truly trial by fire. I learned that leading from the ground floor is really where I feel the most authentic. that connecting with people on an individual level and understanding what their day-to-day life looks like and the struggles that they are facing helps me feel like I could take the most weight off their shoulders and relate to their situation. Setting personal and professional goals, both at STEM to Stern, at Husco, and in Brennan, helped me feel accomplished and helped me feel like I was finally starting to become more of myself. Making time for hobbies also really helped me shape who I am today and feel a little bit less like I was working all of the time. So here I am today. I'm 5 years into my engineering career and 2 years into my role as an executive director. And the last 2 years have been another big period of change for me. I feel that I have been able to understand what makes me most authentically me. And it's about finding what drives other people and connecting with them on those things. I once heard a quote that the people you want to surround yourself with are the ones who will speak your name in a room of opportunity. And I live every day striving to be the person that does that for the people in my life. Whether it's the students or directors of all of the rowing clubs that I work with, whether it's my coworkers, my family, or my friends, I want to be someone that people can depend on to support them and lift them up in wherever they are in their lives. I believe that authenticity will always win out, and care will always come through when you lead with the most authentic version of yourself. Thank you.
Very impressive. It's really nice to hear your story, Rachel.
It's been a minute.
And it's nice to catch up.
Our next speaker today is Tim Hanley. He is the Senior Advisor of the Office of University Relations at Marquette University. I will say that Tim is the only speaker today that I didn't have the opportunity to meet with before today, but I did hear about you from Dick Pieper after you
I believe it.
you took some time to take him on a tour of the business school, and he was very impressed and very inspired, and he said we need to get Tim in here to tell his story. It took about a year to make this all line up with our calendars. I'm thrilled to have you here today and really excited to hear your story.
Thanks. Hey, oops, no, please. So, good afternoon. What a pleasure to be with all of you. I want to give you a warning here because you're going to see a much different presentation from me than Rachel, of course, because I'm about 45 years older than she, so is there. But what I thought I'd do is just share a few reflections. I'm glad you referenced Dick, because I met Dick probably at the very early stage of starting my servant leadership journey. I was encouraged to join the board of the Boy Scouts, where I met Dick. He was in a leadership role way back when. This is the early 90s, to put this into context. And it was about the time I began to be more active in my volunteer leadership roles. And I was very fortunate. I want to talk a little bit about the role models I had, the organizations I worked with, because they had helped me shape and define the servant leadership journey that I've had along the way. So just a really quick background, because these roles were instrumental in what I learned. So I graduated from Marquette in the late 70s. I spent the first 23 plus years of my career at Arthur Andersen. That's now a further history books for you young people. But at the time, it was a predominant accounting consulting firm in Milwaukee. We had a bit of an episode, if you might remember what happened at the Andersen firm, and that really was a shapeful one for me as I led all of our team at Andersen on to the rest of our careers at Deloitte. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. I then kind of jumped into chapter 2 of my career, maybe you call it chapter 3, when I became the dean of the business school at Marquette. I met my good friend John Knapp there, and it was inspired. I was retired at the time, and I think there's not a chance I'd take a job like that unless I did have a servant leadership gene somewhere in my system. So I'll talk a little bit about that and the experiences I had there. And maybe what you can do is just learn a little bit from some of the experiences I've had, because a lot of it was shaped by role models. I don't really have to define servant leadership. I've been talking about this for almost 20 years before I knew it was a thing. I didn't know about the book until I read the book. But I think the people that I worked for showed me by example. They didn't tell me what a servant leader was. That's just how they operated. On every single role I took, that was the philosophy I had. And by focusing on someone else and not yourself, totally focused on the people that you lead and not yourself, you'd be amazed how successful you could be. And so I started that model behavior at Anderson. I took it to my roles at Deloitte. I took it to Marquette. And today I'm still involved, as I was telling Dick, in a half a dozen different organizations and try to bring that same sort of focus. These are just a few things that I think are the primary characteristics of servant leaders. I've become a little bit of a student of leadership. I've also become a student of followership. I've really watched who follows people. And by the way, I also watch what leaders don't have followership. So I'd encourage you to think about that and think about the people that you look up to and watch how people love to work for them and the things that they'll do, because the people that people love to work for are more focused on you than they are them. They're more focused on making you successful than making them successful. It's a super simple formula. And I think there's one thing, and I've watched so many different leaders, so many of them good and some not so good. But I think a couple of these characteristics that jump out to me the most is one, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It seems so simple when you sit across the desk from a young rising leader in your organization, or when I was at Marquette, a professor who was struggling, or I had a client in a difficult situation, all these different parts of my career. If you just for a minute put yourself in their shoes, and you think about next steps you'd take, you'd be amazed that different mindset changes just about everything. And I think that's about being authentic. I think I was really lucky, Rachel, all these many different roles I had, and I was lucky to have lots of leadership roles in my different career, but I never had to change who I was. I never had to act smarter. I never had to act more demonstrative. I just kept the same sort of approach, and it always seemed to work. And so now, after 45 years, I think I have a formula, so I'm not planning to change it now. So I think, again, I come to you today with a pretty big variety of things I've done. I have a good 40 years in business at two of the best accounting consulting firms in the world, and this kind of approach of being a servant leader absolutely builds trust in the people that work for you, and the clients that you serve, and the clients that you hope to serve. It's incredibly simple, and if you have that, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, and incredible humility in everything you do, that absolutely comes through. I didn't expect to have a tenure in higher education. I spent 4.5 years at Marquette, and now another 2 years in this part-time role. And I think that kind of approach works exactly the same sort of way as I'm now interacting. When I was the dean, I was interacting with professors, interacting with students, interacting with companies, interacting with donors. And that same sort of approach, it just builds the kind of connectivity that you're hoping for, and building stakeholder engagement with that sort of approach. Today, I do a lot of my work in the not-for-profit area. Dick's been a real role model for me. Dick, I've talked to a lot of different groups about what you're still doing today. And I hope in a handful of other years, I'm still as active as you are, right, in these kind of ways. And I think this encouragement, by the way, when I first took a position in the Boy Scout Board, I wasn't an experienced Boy Scout. I wasn't an Eagle Scout, but I was encouraged to give back by my firm, by the Parkers, that thought this would be really good for me, and not just good for me, and not good for business development, be really good for the Milwaukee community. And sitting here today, I've been on 12 or 13 charitable boards. I still serve on a couple. I've been serving one. I served the Archdiocese for about 25 straight years, and last year, the Archbishop Listecki said, Jim, you served us for 25 years. Here's a trinket, and thank you for your service. It was a really nice trinket. And then 1 week later, someone else from the Archdiocese called me and said, hey, we got this new inner city school system. It's called Seton, and you'd be an ideal board member. And so I said, yes, that's what you do. So let me just talk a little bit. I know we just got a couple of more minutes to talk about some of these experiences, but one of the more seminal moments I had in my career is I was managing 600 people in the Arthur Andersen Milwaukee office. And on March 15, 2002, the Department of Justice indicted the Andersen firm for a felony. You may not remember this, but in one day it took the entire firm down. And in one day, 600 people in our office had an incredibly uncertain future as to where they would work, what they would do, would they have to move, were my partners and I going to be possibly held personally bankrupt. Clint was in our firm at time. He went, we're never selling this. And so I learned a lot that day about how people view leaders in times like that. And so it wasn't just me, I was the managing partner, but our entire focus was helping all these 600 young people, assure them that they would find a great job next. And that was our goal, and we had to decide this pretty quickly, and within about 30 days, we mostly chose Deloitte, a few others took paths elsewhere. But one of the things I really learned at that time, and I had lots of guidance from more senior partners than me, is that when really difficult things happen, everybody watches the leader. Everybody watches the leader, never underestimate that. And so what I did in times, I think you were talking about all the challenges in healthcare, in times of challenge and uncertainty, it's incredibly important you communicate, and you over-communicate, and you over-communicate again. And we were so lucky, maybe, that because we got good advice, we made a great decision. Deloitte became an amazing firm, and I was lucky to have a terrific career after that. I came to Marquette, as I told you, as I told some of the people at the table, I wasn't planning a second career. Bought a home in Florida. I promised my wife I'd finally spend time with her. And we had an incredible tragedy. Many of you might remember what happened. My predecessor, the dean of the college, was killed in a terrible car accident. And about a week later, someone asked me if I might give them a year of my time to become the dean of the business school. And it was a no hesitation, yes, because I think by then, this whole servant leadership was in my DNA. And what I've been trying to do since then, and now I guess if I'm in chapter 3, I'm still trying to do the same thing. That's why I'm so fortunate that Dick's invited me to come speak at this event so I could share some of these experiences. I would say to all of you, think about your role models, and then think yourself about being a role model. Tom, you and I were talking about this. As I learned from younger people, now I'm not so young anymore. Now I think my job is to help people like Rachel and others how to find their way. I had a conversation with a young recent graduate just yesterday who I never met, and she was having a hard time finding her first job. So someone suggested she might talk to me, so I took a call with it. I think that's what gets into your DNA after a while. So that's just a little bit of my story. You can tell those slides and you have any cool pictures. That's Miss Rachel. I love this quote because I think this defines what it really is to be a servant leader. So thank you so much for having me. Today I look forward to being on panel with Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Tim. That was wonderful. We have one more speaker for you before we go ahead into our panel. So it is my honor to introduce Anne-Marie Baumgartner. She is the Senior Director of Donor Services at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. She has over 15 years of experience in fundraising, alumni and donor relations, communications, volunteer management, and event planning. You'll let us know how we did with this event afterwards. When Sandy and I spoke and we talked about the topic of today, Anne-Marie was one of the first people that I thought about to reach out to. You have this way about you that you make everybody around you feel so comfortable. And I think it's because you're so comfortable in your own shoes and so authentic with who you are. So I can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Oh my goodness, so I have a lot to live up to. Really honored, and thank you, Deanna, for inviting me to speak. Thank you, Dick Keeper, for having me here today to share my story. And you know, my approach to servant leadership really is, we all did that, didn't we? Is rooted in relationships. As you can imagine, being in alumni relations, donor relations is part of the title of the work that I do. But everything about me is about relationships. And it is truly my approach to servant leadership. So, you know, in our lives, we have a lot of different titles. We have a title of wife and sister, friend, mentor. I'm a mom of 3 adult children. I'm a Mimi to a 5-year-old granddaughter. I currently still do serve as the Senior Director of Donor Services at the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And every aspect of my life is rooted in relationships and is how I learned to be a servant leader. So I do have pictures. So here's a little smattering of my life, my 3 kids. I have my granddaughter there. And in the middle there is my dad. And you know, it started with me, with my dad, and he used to ask my siblings and I at the dinner table every night, and it was pretty much every night, like, what do you want to do? And in that, what do you want to do, it wasn't what career do you want to have? Maybe a little bit, it was about the career, but it was about, you know, what kind of person did you want to be? And what kind of plan do you have to make a difference in this world? And that, you know, so I grew up that way. And then I went to the University of Notre Dame. And at the University of Notre Dame, it was ingrained in me that a career or a job is not about the money. It is truly about sharing your gifts, your knowledge, your experience in order to solve big problems. You know, to use your knowledge and your talents and expertise to improve or contribute to society. You might be familiar with their marketing term during football games, which is the Fighting Irish. What would you fight for? And so every day I would think to myself, what am I going to fight for today? Who am I going to fight for today? So my career path, I stayed home with my kids after I got married for 12 years. And, you know, being a parent is the best servant leadership job you can have because you truly serve them. They do not serve you. So I stayed home for 12 years. I volunteered in the community. And then my career started to center around development and philanthropy. Alumni and donor relations, part-time supporting roles, first as the club administrator for the Notre Dame of Los Angeles, and then the coordinator of alumni clubs at Ohio Northern University, which then grew into leadership positions as the associate director and then the director of alumni relations at ONU. Moved to Milwaukee here and became the vice president of marketing and development for a local nonprofit, Secure Futures, and now moved over to the Greater Milwaukee Foundation as the senior director of donor services. If none of you are familiar with Greater Milwaukee Foundation, we manage about $1.2 billion of charitable assets. And these charitable assets, the whole point of these charitable assets is to address community issues throughout time. So we've been 110 years old. We've been addressing community issues for 110 years. We hope to address community issues for the next 110 years. So in my current role, I work with a portfolio of high net worth donors to help them achieve their philanthropic goals. I also advise and manage our donor services and stewardship efforts, and I lead our advising team, who all work with a large portfolio of donors. And at every level of my career, service is at the core. Either serving the alumni donors or serving individuals on my team, as well as peers and supervisors. Service is at the heart of my life's work. So, I'm just gonna ask, you know, how do you serve others if you don't have a relationship? You know, how can you be a servant leader if you don't know how the people that you work for or with respond to motivation, respond to accountability? How do you know what their strengths and weaknesses are? So this is where I believe that rooted in relationships is key to servant leadership. To build relationships, you have to be vulnerable and authentic. You have to know yourself and share who you are with others. To build relationships, you have to have positive intentions. Listen and understand the other person and their perspective. To build relationships, you have to have the desire and the ability to be a confidant and a resource. So managing people brings me joy. A lot of people think I'm crazy because people can be really messy at times, right? But I disagree. I really think that developing, coaching, and growing people to be confident, capable, and ultimately overqualified for their job is the secret sauce for me. Okay, so how do I build authentic relationships that support this leadership, the servant leadership model? Well, I plant the seed. You share with others, who am I? What is my personality style, learning styles? What is challenging for me? How do I respond to feedback? And then I listen to colleagues, you know, and learn their learning styles, their work styles, what motivates them, what challenges them, how do they respond to feedback, and, you know, what are their career goals? Parenting, 3 children, same parents, same environment, 3 completely different humans, 3 different ways you have to parent them, that's how I manage in my work life as well, because you have to meet people exactly where they are and what they're capable of doing, and basically finding ways to help them to grow. I also plant the seed at the beginning by setting clear expectations and holding people accountable and letting them know what happens when they don't meet that expectation. All right. So next, a servant leader enables growth by providing opportunities for experience and building skills, which leads to confidence. And then you can trust that they will do what's needed and they will do everything that's expected moving forward. Training, resources, professional development, I try to be a resource, and every one-on-one I ask them, how can I help you succeed? What resources do you need to be successful? I did have a coaching consultant at one time suggest at the beginning of every meeting that you ask, do you want to be helped, heard, or hugged? Now, I don't know if that works all the time, but however, what it really does do is make them understand that as a manager, I'm not there in that one-on-one to solve their problems. I want to empower them to figure out how to solve their own problems. And so, by wanting to help, you might suggest ways that they do things, but they really need to figure some things out on their own. And then, it's really important to me that I take time to walk with them when the work feels really hard. Because the worst thing in the world is when work is hard and there's nobody standing and walking beside you. And so that's something that I really try to do on a regular basis. All right, then, whoops. There are times as a servant leader too that you have to be the shelter in the storm. So sometimes it is my job to protect the team from outside forces that would derail a project or provide unnecessary harm or growth to progress. Additional work from other units, personality issues with other teammates or departments, processes that may not fit their work style. Those are all things that could possibly, be the storm and derail them. The one thing I've learned too is that you can't separate personal and professional life. And so when there are things going on in people's personal lives, that trickles into their professional lives. And so you really have to sometimes be the shelter in the storm from their personal world as well. And maybe provide some advice or at least a shoulder when it comes to relationship breakups or childcare or elderly care, or if their basement flooded like a lot of people's did, this past year. So being the shelter in the storm was really important too. And then if a servant leader does all these things, right, people get to bloom where they're planted. So in my career, I've shifted roles, institutions, organizations, and I've geographically moved all over the country. And for many, many years, too many years, long time ago, I kind of started this phrase, which was basically bloom where you're planted. Now I know that's on every couch pillow and wall today, but it wasn't 30 years ago. And so I knew that I needed to figure out how to succeed and thrive no matter the landscape. I knew that even if there was a lack of soil, water, and sunshine, I still had to figure it out. But as a leader, there is some magic when you are the one that provides the right landscape. With resources, support, people grow really fast and strong, and sometimes so fast that the pot becomes too small for their roots, and it's time for a different pot. So helping to grow others out of a position is incredibly rewarding. It can be difficult at times, but it really means that they're going to take what they learned to another workplace. They'll continue to be productive, utilize their skills and experience to contribute to the world in a bigger way. And it creates a multiplier effect and really is impactful. So I, being my authentic self, am rooted in relationships. And this is my approach to being a servant leader. Grounded in listening and learning, developing and coaching my teams, and growing their talent and competence to spread their roots into the community and into the next fight. Thank you.
Benji and Bree. Well, it is time for our panel now. So I'm going to ask all three speakers to come up, please. I'm going to hand you this microphone.
So one that doesn't work?
It's the one that works the best. And I'll let you kind of pass it around as questions pop up. And actually, Jean, can I invite you to help with this part of, if you take that half of the room and I'll take this half of the room?
Got it.
Thank you. Who has a question for the panel?
For Rachel, again with MPS, I work with MPS, and I was wondering if she still does this STEM with them, because we could really use it.
The MSOE STEM department does a lot of work with MPS. There's a community robotics team that meets for both middle school and high school at the MSOE STEM Center, which is located underneath Beats Field. I'm sure someone who works at MSOE could connect you with Liz Taylor, who's the director there. She's got Liz.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where is the balance being a servant, or what I like to call a serving leader, versus company corporate goals? Any experience from either one of you where you had to balance them and maybe go in the direction of corporate goals versus individual goals?
I suppose I've had about 40 years of experience in that. So you're part of an organization, and I had a leadership role in one of the largest accounting consulting firms in the world, and I had my own goals, and these were metric goals. So I was expected to grow a business, I was expected to deliver profitability. And so you can't ignore that as a servant leader. However, how you deliver that, you have a lot of control over. And part of what I had to do occasionally in these, say, 20 years of leading businesses is we didn't always achieve our goals. I was able to do that more often than not. And sometimes it's really important when you're in a down economy, or maybe your consulting business isn't growing and you can't quite deliver the metric goals. You have to protect your people. And so some of what you have to do as a leader, sometimes you have to accept the responsibility, and you have to be sure you don't pass it on down, because sometimes you've all seen situations where, oh, geez, we didn't do this because John and Mary missed their sales goals. So I would say I had goals most of my career. They were metric goals, but I try to find a way to make this more about my people's getting to their goals. If I just helped my people accomplish their metric goals, everything took care of itself. And so what I did, particularly the last 10 years of my career, is I just focused on if I can help these 10 leaders make all their goals, then everything else took care of itself. And I think if you have people that know you and they know that's how you operate, then you can make these two things quite equivalent.
I'm wondering, with servant leadership, have you found that, kind of goes on to Jerry's question here, but if you don't have metrics, and let's say there's 3 domains, your corporate lifestyle, giving back to your community and so on, and then the organization that we all belong to, the family, how have you seen different ways of applying servant leadership concepts to those 3 domains?
Well, I don't want to dominate, but let me just address that point. I think you have to be a role model. I always felt that, hey, if I worked every single Saturday and Sunday, which occasionally I did in the early parts of my career, that wasn't being a very good role model for the whole work and life balance thing. And occasionally, if I left to go and watch my daughter play volleyball at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that was the best thing that I could do. And so I think it is, this one point I made about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I have lots of other things that matter to me a lot more than work. And so I think if your people see that, it sets a great role model. I'm sure you ladies have a few other observations.
I also think it's about talking about your family and your other world, and like I said, all of your life outside of work does affect your life at work. And so being truly honest and transparent about the fact that you have all these other responsibilities or you have all these other things to do as well. So I really think that it's not thinking that it's always so separate and that it all is interconnected.
I think I would echo what Anne-Marie said, is everything's so connected, and I always try to keep the through line, which is, who I am as a person and my authentic self, and I try to show up the same way at work as I do at home, as I do to all of the rowing clubs that I work with, to rowing practice, to a robotics competition, and I try to be the same version of me, but I'm just applying those principles a little bit differently. The things that I share at work may be a little bit different than the things that I share at home, but every aspect of my life is intertwined, and I think that servant leadership principles can apply to so many different things that we do, and it really is just rooted in showing up as your authentic self, as your honest self, and making sure that the things that are important to you are the forefront at work, at home, and in anything else you might do.
I'm just curious, maybe some tips for not just being your authentic self, but embracing others to authentically serve others and adapt that servant leader mindset. Maybe before you got your prestigious titles, and just instilling that philosophy and maybe some challenges that you've encountered throughout that and how you overcame that.
I work with a lot of middle school students, and middle school students always show up as their authentic selves. Good or bad. For better or for worse, you deal with a lot of different personalities. They're all coming from a different situation at home or at school, and everyone's carrying something different into an after-school program. And I think that listening is really the root of all understanding. And most of the time, all people, but especially younger students, just want to be heard. And giving them the space to say what they need to say what's on their mind, and not trying to control or regulate those feelings or emotions, I think can apply to adults as well. Making sure that reactions we're having at work maybe are appropriate for the setting that we're in, but I think that making sure that people have the space to be themselves by giving them the space to listen is what I found is the best way to make true, meaningful relationships.
So that's the trick with management, is lots of different styles, right? Learning styles, work styles, and all that really, really hard to manage sometimes. But allowing them to, and giving them what they need to work the way that they need to work. And so, I've had people that are extremely disorganized. They never read a single email. They get to a meeting and they're completely lost because everybody else has read the email, But you have to just work with them on their level and what they need at that time. And if they can't manage that, that's okay, as long as they're doing what they need to do to get their work done. And it's amazing how different work styles can actually get work done differently, but they still get their work done. So really just embracing those people's challenges, meeting them where they are, and then trying to just make sure that their weaknesses don't get in the way of their goals, and helping and shaping how they can do that.
I'll just add, sometimes just finding opportunities. I'm looking at my good friend John Knapp here, who I had a chance to work with for a number of years. Sometimes just giving people opportunities, maybe before they're ready, challenging them to do something or join an organization. And so sometimes it's about creating opportunities. And so I'm at a much different level of my career than my fellow panelists. And so sometimes I'm at the point now of thinking about how you can create opportunities.
Rachel, I have a question for you. You're clearly a remarkable young woman, and I want to know what your life, because most 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds or even 22-year-olds don't know what they want to do in their life. And you seem to have this great passion, direction. What in your life inspired you? How did you get there? How did you have this confidence and courage to do this?
Thank you, that's really nice. I think that from a young age, my parents always told me that I could do anything. And that has always really stuck with me, and I think is a through line for my confidence. But when I was younger, I really only just wanted to make a difference. And I didn't really have a clear vision for what that might look like. And it wasn't until I got to college and I got to expand my worldview and highlight my privilege and understand what inequity is in our community and in the world. And that's something that I continue to learn every day. And I don't think I'll ever feel, maybe as accomplished as you are saying, but I think that there's always more work to do. And I think that there's always a difference to be made. And I certainly can't do it all, but I can do what I'm doing and I can help other people do more. And I think that's what is the root for me, is looking for ways I can make a difference and how I can help students make a difference and become leaders in their own community and environment. Yeah.
Thank you. How about one more round of applause for your next speaker?
Alrighty, so it is now time for our roundtable discussion. So this is a time where everybody that took the time to come here today gets an opportunity to process and digest all that they heard from the speakers today. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to select a recorder at your table. Go around the table if you haven't already with a 2-breath introduction. So that means if you have to take more than 2 breaths, you're talking too much and move on. And then it's just an open discussion where in the takeaway, what we'll do at the end is we'll walk around and ask one person from each table to share one takeaway from the conversation and connect it to what you heard from our presenters today. Does that sound like a good plan? Do that? All right, go ahead.
I love the students think about what like the leaders.
Yeah, tell the students on things as leaders, and you all stood up and you told the truth.
We are outside of here.
As being humble.
Okay, we're gonna start sharing out.
That's already getting us. Yeah.
Hello. All right. So our main takeaway was meeting people where they're at, and not just directly to the person itself, but how the other team reacts to that. Because sometimes people are wondering why is this other person being treated differently, which is probably more of a challenge than actually treating people where they're at. So that was the main takeaway.
So our table kind of talked about how everybody's speeches, but what really kind of stuck with us was being aware, knowing that you are different and that you have strengths, and instead of internalizing that, using that to your advantage and taking action on it, and then just being the best leader you can be.
All right, so our table talked about and really appreciated the expanse on experience within having certain leadership qualities from the more corporate side to the and then Lady Rachel that started out, in college, seeing that wide variety and having that authenticity span corporate and even other areas. So that was nice to see.
But one thing that stuck out with all of us was Anne Marie's metaphor, a garden metaphor of just being water, sunlight, and soil, and planting the seeds and building those authentic relationships. The idea of being a shelter in the storm. So servant leaders are helping not only navigate the storms, but helping others navigate through those storms. We found ourselves utilizing the metaphors too, like, getting servant leadership is getting your hands dirty in people's lives and the problems of organizations or communities. So blooming where you are at. So not just us personally, but letting your other teammates bloom with authenticity, and just understanding the different seasons of life that we're all in, and navigating that as a servant leader, not only for ourselves, but for our teams as well.
Hi, we had a really good discussion too, but our key takeaway was integrity, which is a key concept in servant leadership. And we have a quote, do what's right even when people aren't watching, and then we're not sure the offer of that. But people are, and also on the flip side, people are always watching, and as one of our people said, they're always watching, especially as we talked about during difficult times. Like how we'll get political, but in difficult times.
Hi, we centered around the topic of followership and recognizing that many times good leaders are also followers. Also, too, the role of a leader will change. We bring up also the topic that leaders are watched, especially in terms of crisis, and that sometimes one of the roles a leader has to play is to be authoritative, especially if the building's on fire. Get out is serving others very well.
Get comfortable talking about what is hard.
In times of crisis, we need to be loved. Build circles of trust. Surround yourself with confidence.
And we talked about being your authentic self. Takes building relationship with people first and getting to understand and know them before we can actually be our authentic selves or know if someone else is their authentic self. And how much empathy actually also plays into that as well.
We had a great discussion. We talked a lot about being grounded and genuine, that humility proves to show credibility, and it's okay to focus on your people when you take care of them, your own future goals as well.
Well, I am going to hand the mic over to Tom Thibodeau from Richard University. He has offered to share some closing comments to us. You're looking at me like you're surprised. I thought you knew. Well, no, I've never seen you shy away from sharing what you have to say. I just need 2 minutes at the end for a little feedback, please.
Thank you. When I had a chance to meet Tim, I said, well, how long have you been at this? Well, 2009 is because of Dick Pieper, who was at an international conference on servant leadership here, and then asked people in the state of Wisconsin, what would you like to do with this? So we'd like to get together and talk. Well, we are now in our 16th year. We build our organization, we build our communities, we create our democracy by the conversations, the ways in which we talk to and with each other. The word conversation comes from the Latin word conversatio, which Augustine used in the 4th century, which means to love someone else. Conversation, you extend yourself to others. I would tell you that the 3 people that presented here today, you go to national conferences and not hear 3 better presentations. Is that not so? Because they spoke to us not with just conviction, but with love. Conversatio, the way in which we extend ourselves to each other becomes so significant and important in building our communities. And it doesn't stop here. Our question is now, what are the conversations that you and I are going to have the rest of this day? How important it is in terms of bringing people together. That's my first thought. What a blessing it is to be here together. Second, really when asked, give me your best test, I really go back to this. Because of our service and leadership, are people healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants and leaders. And this is what I think we need to pay attention to. This was prophetic. And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? And I work at Paterno University, but I work at a Catholic worker house in La Crosse, and the people are desperate. Last week in our food pantry, I saw 3 times as many people than I've ever seen before. All I had was 1 bag of groceries to give each person, and they were desperate because they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. This is the time for servant leaders to look to those people who are on the margins, to extend our conversations to people who don't have someone to talk to or to be listened to. This is a servant leadership moment. And third, can you feel the goodness in this room? Isn't it just palpable? Where's all of the division people keep talking about? See, the role of leaders, and people are pointing to Dick Pieper, and I think it's important to recognize him as the elder statesman in the room. What's the role of leadership? Bring people from different perspectives together for a greater good. That's what we're about. That's what happens at this university. That's what's happening within this community. And then Deanne wanted me to talk about a little bit about what we're doing on the west coast of Wisconsin, over there in La Crosse. We have a master's degree in servant leadership and have now developed a doctorate degree in ethical leadership, where we have people coming from across the country to join us. We have a certificate in servant leadership that we now extended throughout the country, and we've had 2 people overseas have actually taken this because people are interested in this concept. We work with our Chamber of Commerce and try to see servant leaders in businesses across the community, because not everybody can afford a college education, but certificates and trainings are very important. Teaching servant leadership in the La Crosse County Jail. These are good men who've made mistakes when they're at one point they need to live back in the community. So what better way than to understanding these are our gifts and how I can give back, because everybody can serve. So these are just a few of the things that we're doing. We have a round table on the first Tuesdays. Tomorrow we have our conversation on servant leadership as well. And then I'd like to invite you to some
pay attention that we, in the last weekend of the Thursday and Friday of June, we have our statewide servant leadership conference. This year our title is Resilience and Renewal. So thank you so very much for your thoughts. Next is
Easy doesn't count.